Another thing we should talk about when we talk about how you own oil and gas in the ground is that there are two sort of similar but theoretically different ideas about how people own oil and gas in the ground. And they might seem like a distinction without a difference. It may seem that they're very similar, but for a couple points in our class over the entire course of the semester, it will become important which of these theories of ownership you use. Now, the first theory of ownership is the one that's used in Texas. You can find, again, these theories of ownership at page 58 in your book. So the first is this idea that we use in Texas, which is that you own the oil in place in the ground. So you own the oil and gas that's underneath the surface of your property, and that's followed here in Texas, but also in Colorado, New Mexico, Michigan, and North Dakota. And we know that New Mexico and North Dakota are now our second and third biggest oil producers. So that's a very important theory, that you own the oil and gas in the ground. And I think the thing that you have to keep in mind about that, though, is that although you own the oil and gas in the ground, if somebody starts extracting oil from the property next to you and your neighbor starts pumping, some of your oil and gas may end up with them. And as we'll see with the rule of capture that we'll talk about later, that means that you don't own it anymore. Now it belongs to the neighbor. So that's an important qualification, but the basic idea is you own the oil and gas underneath the ground in your property. So that it's a property right. Creating a mineral estate, it's just part of your mineral estate in land. Now, the other big theory of ownership is called the non-ownership theory, and that's a misnomer. It doesn't really mean non-ownership. It just means you don't necessarily own the oil and gas in place. Instead, you just have the exclusive right to produce oil and gas on your land by drilling straight down for it. So you have that right. Sometimes we use a French term for it, which is a profit or a profit à prendre, and that's followed in Oklahoma, California, Louisiana, also important oil and gas states. And I think one thing you'll see throughout the course is that often Oklahoma has rules that are slightly different from Texas. So we often use it as an opportunity to contrast those rules. So contrasting the rules here, Texas believes you own the oil and gas in place on your land. Oklahoma says it's really just a profit à prendre. You just really have the exclusive right to try and produce oil and gas from your land. The thing that is the same about both of these theories is that you have a property right. So one is a property right to the oil and gas in place. That's what we call the ownership theory. And the other is a property right to produce oil and gas from that surface. That's a profit à prendre. Because they're property, that means it's conveyances and not contract. So just as you would need a deed or transfer a house, similarly, it's not a contractual right. It's not just a contractual right to money. It is a right to property.